I'm actually going to go back a little bit here to when I was pregnant with my daughter, because look, I've left this stuff so far behind, and it's been taking me a long time to try and remember all this. And I've just remembered a couple of things. When I was pregnant with my daughter, and I was fairly heavily pregnant, we'd had an argument in the house. Now, in the house that we were living in, it was sort of, at that stage, sort of a two-story house, but under the house was not concreted or anything. It was just dirt. There was an old toilet down there that we didn't use, so it was never cleaned, and the laundry was down there with just a small slab of concrete there. So I ended up living downstairs in that, heavily pregnant, for 3 days. He wouldn't let me back in the house. I had no money or able to get anywhere to ring somebody to come and get me, so I just lived downstairs. The youngest daughter, she brought me down a pillow and a blanket when he went to work or went out or went to sleep or something, and she brought me down a little bit of food. And I stayed down there heavily pregnant for 3 days. He did come down and get me after the second day and said, "Are you coming back upstairs?" So I went upstairs. But as soon as I got up there, he started on me again. So I just walked straight back downstairs and spent another night down there. When my daughter was in intensive care, of course, we had to go up there and feed and wash and gown. And the first time I was up there feeding, after a minute and a half, she was fast asleep and I couldn't wake my baby, and I was getting a bit upset. And the nurses said, "Don't worry, we'll test feed her next time." So they did. And she was getting nearly 3 times the amount of quantity of milk that she should have got from 3 minutes of either side. So no wonder she was going to sleep. She'd had enough food. And then once my milk really came down, I had to lay on my back to feed because I had so much milk. But on doing so, the hospital asked me if I wouldn't mind expressing my milk and helping to feed some of the other little babies whose parents had no milk for one reason or another. There was a little boy whose mother had been on drugs, and he was challenged baby. His mother wasn't around. And then there was another little Aboriginal baby. His mum was there, but she had no milk. And then there was a little pair of twins that you could hold in your hand. So that was a very precious thing, that I could help these other little bubbies and feed them and look after them. So that was very precious to me, being able to do that. While I was in hospital, my daughter's father would come up and he'd say, "Oh, when are you due to feed again?" And I'd tell him that, I'm due to feed at this time. So he'd say, "Oh, I'll come back after you've fed." So he'd come back after I'd fed my daughter. He'd pick me up from the hospital and he would take me somewhere to have sex. In doing so, he broke all my stitches open, and then they all got infected. But he didn't care how much, as long as he was getting what he wanted. I didn't have a choice in it. I had to go. After 9 days, I went home from hospital, and I had a couple of days at home, and then I went back to work. But I was really lucky on the day that I came home from hospital. Judy, my daughter's father's ex-girlfriend, was there. She'd been staying there for a couple of days with him while I wasn't there. But she was there when I got home, so it was really good. She had the house clean and a meal cooked for me and helped me out. But then I went back to work after about 3 days, and I was lucky I could take my baby to work because we had the service station, and I was working on the other side of town, and I would have to drive past the hospital every day to go to work. And so for a little while, I would feed my baby before I'd go to work. Then I would call in at the hospital. I would express my milk for the other little babies, and then I would go to work. And I would do the same thing on the way home. Before I left work, I would feed my daughter. I would stop at the hospital, and I would express milk so that the other little bubbies still had milk all the time, fresh milk as well. That was really I loved being able to help them. I'm bringing my daughter home from hospital. The eldest daughter finally settled down and we started another really good relationship. She loved her little sister and still does. Actually, all three kids loved their little sister and still do. But remember, my daughter's father wanted to go out somewhere and we were leaving my daughter home with her elder sister one day, and I was a little bit hesitant, but we did, and she turned out to be the best babysitter, but she couldn't stand the smell of spew or a wet nappy, so as soon as she would have a wet nappy or spew a little bit on her clothes, she would take it off and she would just drop them wherever she was and put clean clothes on her. But at least I knew my daughter was well looked after, but I had a lot of washing when I got home. When my daughter was about a month old, we'd had there was always arguments in the house, but, and I had to I left the house again because it wasn't safe. Now, at the back of the house where we were living at that time, there was a big park, and it was a rainy night, just drizzling rain. So I spent the night in a park with my little month-old baby in a bassinet, crouched over her all night so the rain didn't get her because I couldn't go back in the house and I had no money, I couldn't go anywhere, I didn't have a car, so I was stuck there and I stayed in the park all night in the drizzling rain with my daughter. He didn't care where I was, he didn't come out looking for me. He knew I couldn't have gone far, he just let me go. When my daughter was approximately 6 weeks old, I actually fell pregnant again. I wasn't planning on having another baby, and I'd only just found out that I was pregnant, and I was about 3 months pregnant by this time. But I was still breastfeeding, which I reckon you don't fall pregnant when you're breastfeeding, and I was still actually hemorrhaging from my daughter's birth. And I had to walk up to the shop this day to get milk and bread for the other kids. And I'd had a little bit of spotting of blood before I left, but I still had to go and do it. And I ended up starting to miscarriage in the shopping centre. So I took my jumper off, I had a pair of jeans on and wrapped it around my waist and started to walk home. And as I was walking home, there was an old couple following me. Now I had my daughter in the pram, my jeans were covered in blood. There was blood all down the footpath. And this old couple never even asked me if I needed help. So I got in the paddock. We had about 3 acres, so it was a fair walk across the paddock to get to the house. And I'm screaming out for my eldest daughter to come out. And she came out and I just walked off and left my daughter in the pram in the middle of the paddock. I said, I'm miscarrying. I've got to go inside. And I went inside and sat in the corner of the bathroom and took my jeans off, and I just flooded the floor with blood. So I got in the bath and I was swimming in blood, in and out of consciousness. And I said to my daughter, the eldest one, I said, can you ring Sue, my girlfriend, tell her I've miscarried and I need her to come and help. And so she rang her, and in the process she rang a friend of mine, a Dr. Sue. And Sue said to her, just go and have a look and see how much blood she's lost. Well, she came and had a look, and then she rang Sue, and then Sue came over and she took one look at me and she said, oh my God, Loretta, how are you still alive? I was just swimming in blood, in and out of consciousness. So she rang the ambulance, and the ambulance come and took me to hospital, and I had another baby in the hospital, in the ambulance on the way there. And then when I got into the hospital, they said, oh no, you've probably passed them all. We're not going to give you any more. And then I said, I was singing out. I said, I need to push. So then I had another baby there, and then they finally put me in and gave me a curette. But I ended up having a miscarriage of a multiple birth of 8 babies, that they counted the fetuses at home and everything. And that was really hard to take, losing my babies. But at that time, that I needed a blood transfusion because I was going to die. And at that time, AIDS was just coming out in the US, and you got it through blood transfusion, so I didn't want one. But The doctors ended up overriding my refusal to having a blood transfusion because I was going to die, and they just gave it to me anyway. They said I wasn't on sound mind, so, which is good. But it was a horrible wait period for years after that. They did recall everybody up within that period of time, about 12 months later, to get tested to see whether they had AIDS. And I was always clear I've never had that. But anyway, my daughter's father came up to the hospital eventually, and he just walked in and looked at me and he said, "Oh, what a effing mess." And I said, "So you've been home?" He said, "No, I haven't been home yet." But by the time he got home, the eldest daughter had cleaned everything up anyway. So he really didn't see what was going on and what had actually happened. He just said, "What a effing mess," and walked out. While the loss of my babies and the miscarriage was really hard emotionally to take, as I healed, I looked upon it as though it was nature's way of taking away something that was not perfect. And in having a multiple birth, there is always sick children, and it is a hard road. And in the situation that I was in at the time, I would never have had any support, and it would have just made a horrible life for the children. And for me, I wouldn't have, I probably would have coped. I'm a very strong person, and I would have done the best that I could, but that choice was taken away from me.